Yo, what's up guys, I'm Dunmere, I'm a rank 1 peak Supervive player, and I have almost 1,000 hours played in the game so far. So with that, I went ahead and put together a guide for a character that I have around 200 hours on almost, Felix. So hopefully you guys get something useful out of this video.
Let's discuss Felix's strengths and weaknesses, starting with the strengths. Felix is quite powerful when he gets enemies where he wants them, stacked up on each other and taking a bunch of damage of his powerful AoE. Yet, Felix isn't dependent on this just happening, as he also has both the mobility and the CC to force enemies into this situation. So let's go a bit more in depth on this. Felix's most fundamental strength is his powerful ability to pressure multiple enemies at once. He has multiple ways to damage more than just one enemy at a time, as his flamethrower cleaves through enemies and his ultimate can lay down an area of effect damaging field. Yet his passive is also capable of amplifying this multi-target damage, as ignited enemies continue to take damage even when Felix is not attacking them. This of course applies on multiple targets just as his attacks do, but his flame dart can even accelerate this and spread the ignite on one enemy onto all nearby ones. And to top this off, his fire spin shield applies not only anti-heal to any target it hits, but it also can buff him for hitting multiple targets, while also forcing them closer to him for easier AoE damage. Yet as previously mentioned, Firefox doesn't lack in mobility despite this powerful cleave damage, so if enemies group up at all, he'll usually be able to jump on them and catch them out. This is his second core strength, his mobility. With 2 dashes and an ultimate that can also operate as a dash, he simply just isn't limited for movement. He even also has a high base movement speed. So while he can use this to get onto grouped up enemies and then chase them down as they try to run, he can also just use it to escape when losing, which allows quite a powerful use case to soft reset mid-fight, but also to head for a res beacon when losing. All in all, this means he has powerful potential to save his team from a losing situation, but that he also can counter the enemy's ability to save themselves from a losing situation too, which leads us to his third core strength, that he snowballs very hard. Felix has multiple ways that his power increases as the fight goes on. He gets cooldown resets the more the enemies are ignited, which occurs the more damage he can output, especially with his fire dart being capable of spreading the ignite level of a target that's already ignited. Felix also gains resets on his flame spin shield when he knocks an enemy, and gains more HP buffs when he can flame spin on already ignited enemies. Simply put, you don't want to stick around long against a Felix that is getting good value against your team. Despite all the strengths, Felix does still have some weaknesses. The first of these is his limited range. The majority of Felix's damage requires him to be on top of the enemy, whether to burn them and apply ignite, or to leave down the flame field on his ultimate. While this alone is a disadvantage, it is even more so of one in a battle royale, as in any situation with multiple teams, you don't want to engage on one of them, as you'll almost certainly be third-partied afterwards. Yet since Felix cannot secure value when not on top of enemies, his team is often forced to engage anyway, or they'll just become poked out by ranged enemies over time. In addition to this, Felix also lacks direct damage output. While his potential damage output is high, his damage is not that great and does require that it ticks up over time, meaning most enemies can beat him in a raw 1v1. Especially if they understand how his ignite passive works and how to play around it. Though this can be bypassed, it is still a disadvantage, and will end with Felix suffering when surprised or playing in unideal situations. So with the strengths and weaknesses over, let's talk about how to actually play Felix. Felix plays best as a combination of a disruptor and assassin. As a disruptor, he looks to get onto the enemy team and apply as much AoE damage, anti-heal, and crowd control them as possible, before dashing safely away. And as an assassin, he looks to sneak up on a single target and full ignite them with his combo, before sealing their fate with a fire spin to pull them back. The exact version of this he'll take will change with each fight, but if he morphs himself to what each situation requires, he'll terrorize his enemies. So with that as an overview of strategy, let's go into specifics on his abilities. To use Felix's primary fire best, you'll want to focus on maximizing its damage by lining up multiple targets. Of course, the flame cleaves through enemies, so it's very valuable to predict how enemies will try to escape from you before you engage on them. This way you can position yourself effectively. Also, though it doesn't quite appear so, the flame does have a bit of travel time, so try to aim where enemies are moving rather than aiming directly at them, or you'll miss out on a lot more damage than you think. As for his flame dart, Felix can get some value out of poking with it. You need to think about his cooldown and how you'll be able to follow up though. Flame dart's absolute most valuable use is to spread ignite onto grouped up enemies. So if you're planning on engagement on multiple targets, you definitely need to keep it, as hitting the flame dart after an enemy is already ignited can secure a full fight win for you. However, if you're only fighting a single target, it can be quite valuable just for its slow and ignite alone, so feel free to poke at a single target with it. If you land it, then you can engage, as not only will they be slowed, but they'll also take damage significantly faster as you can get to level 2 ignite much quicker. In regards to Felix Fire Spin, it does offer excellent value directly to him in the form of HP, but it's better to think about his displacement value and anti-heal as priorities over getting yourself the HP. Sure, if you've maxed it to rank 3, you could consistently pop it right at the beginning of every engagement, expecting to get it reset from ignite procs quickly, but even a few second window where you lack it can stop you from countering the enemy, either countering them by predicting and pulling them out of their dashes, or countering the healing of a support right as they're looking to heal the damage taken. These should absolutely be your biggest priorities because of this. And on top of so, doing so also allows you to look for flame shields on enemies that have already been ignited, which will gain you much more overhealth. However, it is still worth mentioning that Felix can use his fire spin while using his ultimate too, so this can be a very valuable use to pull them into it. Moving on to Felix's movement ability, his dash offers two primary choices for its use. It offers the indirect value of raw mobility, while also offering the direct value of igniting an enemy he hits with it. However, being able to reposition to a safer location, chase enemies, or escape a third party coming in is the biggest priority for a Felix, as this just gives him so much more potential in a fight. But this doesn't mean you shouldn't ever use it for a rapid ignite still. A good rule of thumb for this is to not use your dash for ignite purposes when you only have one charge left, and definitely not when you have one charge left and also don't have your ultimate. You'll mainly just want to look to use it on a completely unsuspecting enemy as a part of your assassination dash flame dart combo. Even more, you'll get bonus value if you can just walk up on the enemy first without using any dashes at all. As for Felix's ultimate, it's quite a powerful one, having the capability to completely manipulate an enemy team, while on top of this, also offering Felix the ability to engage on the enemy without using a dash to do so. This means it's a very strong tool to engage on a grouped up set of enemies, or in a situation when they can be forced to stay on the fire like in a long corridor. So if these opportunities arise, definitely use it for this case, and try to predict where the enemies will try to kite to, so you can cut them off and force them to take damage to fire or to die to your team. However, the ultimate is also just useful as an escape in a pinch. So when enemies don't get too grouped up or stuck in a small area, save it to escape with. This should give you some freedom to go even more aggressive with your regular dashes, or to use them for their ignite. Now that we have the specifics covered, let's talk about how to apply this into a full playstyle. Felix's playstyle modifies depending on the situation of any fight, specifically how many enemies he has to fight and how grouped up they are. This leads him to have a herding / assassination playstyle against a single full health enemy, and a hard engage all the way in playstyle against larger groups of 3 or 4 enemies. And finally, a playstyle that starts to mold into an awkward middle against groups made of around 2 enemies. So I'll start with explaining his herding / assassination playstyle against solos, then go into how he plays against a full group, and last explain how he plays into 2 enemies and also explain why it's a bit awkward. Felix's most standard and valuable posture in a fight is to go on the flank. It enables him to sneak up on enemies, which allows him to go for full dash flame dart combos or primary fire dart combos. Yet this also means he'll likely run into an enemy also looking for a flank. But still, while even when playing against a single target, Felix's most overarching goal is to get the enemies to group back up. He gets insane value cleaving into multiple enemies, anti-healing them, and igniting full teams. His main priority is to force the enemy back into their team, and gets bonus points if they die in the process. So if Felix sneaks up onto a single enemy or they get too close to him, you should look to pop them with his flame dart and dash if possible. On an unsuspecting group, it's best to go dash into flame dart so it can spread flames onto the whole group. But when there is not a group, the slow from flame dart can make it much easier to secure a dash onto them to get the full ignite, while also allowing Felix not immediately have to commit his positioning. It won't always be realistic to get off a dash onto an enemy though if they see you, so you can consistently just rely on getting the first ignite proc off of flamethrower damage and then finishing it off with the flame dart. If Felix isn't able to sneak up on the enemy, he shouldn't look to hit them with his dash, as he'll need to use one to get close enough to them in the first place. Instead, he'll want to poke at them with his flame dart if they're far. If he hits, then he can dash onto them and look to pull them out of their escape dash with the flame spin. If he misses, he can just wait a few seconds to try again. Or, if the enemy gets closer, you can just burn them with your primary fire to ignite them, and then flame dart them to get the full level 2 ignite. Depending on how much damage or ignite you've dealt, you can then look to pull them out of their dash and chase them. This is the strategy against longer range characters, but into characters that are quite powerful at close range, you'll need to kite them back a bit first. You need to bait them into committing onto you, so it makes it easy to hit a flame dart slow, or let you poke them a bit with your primary fire as they walk towards you. Either way, they'll often overcommit, and then you can dive them and attempt to counter their dash with your fire spin pole. Regardless, if you play like this against either type of enemy, they'll either die or flee back to their team. This means your mission is accomplished. So as you play through the style, you'll get to a point where 3 to 4 enemies are grouped up, or you've already won the fight, or you already lost the fight because of something that isn't your responsibility. In the last case, you of course should just go run off and res your team at a beacon. But assuming the fight is still going on and the enemy survived your herding, or started off grouped up, you just want to apply as much AoE value to them as possible after this. Ideally, you'll get to sneak up on them without dashing at all, slam one of the group with your dash flame dart combo to fully ignite them and spread level 1 ignite to the whole enemy team, and then suck them all in as they try to dash away. Communicate this with your team and it's a free win. But the times enemies are grouped up isn't usually that long, so you need to take advantage of enemies being grouped up nearly immediately after they do so. So if they're in a location where you can cut their escape off, or you can trap them with your ultimate field, or you can't cover the distance fast enough otherwise, then pop your ult and go in. But if they're not in a situation like this, or you don't have your ultimate, you should look to dive slightly to the side or behind the enemy, and then look to counter their dash away with your fire spin pole, while cooking them with your primary fire. In each of these versions, your priorities are to ignite somebody and flame dart them to spread it, counter an enemy escape where they're healing with your flame spin pole, and just not die in the process. Overall, not dying is just a large priority for Felix, so you always want to be looking to read the flow of the fight to do it. This basically comes down to how much HP you and your team have versus how much they have. Also, you should always be looking to track if an enemy wasted their dash, or you cancelled it, and then they'll be an easy kill after that. So after you've read the flow of the fight, if you're winning, keep on going and pay attention to the resets you're getting on your spin from kills, and the cooldown reduction on the ability you've maxed to rank 3 from ignites. If you aren't winning though, you don't need to force it. Really, you just shouldn't even try to force it at all, as Felix gets most of his value from a strong spike on his engage, not just standing around trying to flame someone once they're recovered. Instead, you should disengage into the shadows and flank again. The enemy might get cocky, you might get an opportunity to hit a dash flame dart combo on somebody doing this, or have a good opportunity to just engage on them again from behind. Regardless, Felix is a dive engage character, and though he is quite powerful, he needs his team's support against groups. So always communicate to your team your plans and make sure they're close enough to help before you go in. And if you accidentally go too early or your team takes too much damage to engage, just back up and prioritize your own life. So with the two extremes of groups and solos covered, why is it awkward for Felix to play against 2 or so enemies? When Felix is looking to fight 2 out of 4 enemies, it likely means the rest of his team is doing something else. If they aren't and can follow up on the 2, then he can just jump on them and pull them and his team will mop them up. However, if he is alone or with just one other person, his value output starts to wane. Though his output can literally double against 2 enemies, only having one ally or nobody to follow up means that unless he gets a sneaky assassination combo, he really shouldn't be taking the fight. This is simply because Felix gets much of his value indirectly by amplifying that of his teammates, by grouping enemies up. So even if he gets a decent engagement and pulls the enemies, they're unlikely to immediately get crushed by the follow-up from Felix's single ally, or lack of an ally. It's sort of a multiplication problem where Felix gets huge value from amplifying 2 or 3 other allies, but barely makes up for his own lack of raw damage output with just 1, or 0 if there wasn't an ally in the first place. So when Felix is in a situation like this, it's best for him to either disengage and go support his team, or to just distract the enemies if he's alone, so his team can take a 3v2. Just be careful not to take too much damage while distracting them. So stick to your distance and just make them feel like you'll sneak off and cause problems if they don't try and stop you. So while this all is how Felix plays in 95% of situations, he does have an extra playstyle against an enemy team full of high mobility, close range enemies. These kind of characters will only really win if they jump onto your long range allies and crush them. So on Felix, you should look to counter the strat by letting them dive onto your team, and then looking to pull them off of your allies with your fire spin. If your team gets good enough value right after this, you can just cook them and look to spread ignite with your fire dart, or maybe even dash flame dart combo the enemies. But if things aren't going perfectly, you'll want to follow along behind them as they chase. They likely won't focus you, so you won't take much damage unless you get directly where they're targeting your allies. Keep watching the fight and trying to ignite them, and when you get your pullback, look to predict their next movements. If you start losing allies, you should just go look to escape for a res instead. Alternatively, you can also counter ult toward your own team to flame the floor where the enemies will want to go. This is mostly a good choice if the enemy's movement path is quite predictable, like into a long corridor. If you can counter a full enemy engage with your ult though, and maybe even punish them after, it's an extremely useful option.